So, hello everyone. My name is Xiao-Tian, Sheltia Zhang. Just feel free to call me Sheltia as a middle name. And I am a postdoc researcher or research associate at the Department of the History of Science, Tsinghua University in China. And the research described here today originated from my earlier translation work to Lane Merrill's The Romance of Victorian Natural History when I was a PhD candidate. And in that book, Merrill discussed Philip Henry Gosse as this wide-ranging British naturalist who wrote a number of distinguished scientific and popular books, and took him as a key figure embedded with the romance of natural history in Victorian era. And he was the father of the seashore studies and of the aquariums, wrote and profusely illustrated in color his great scientific monograph on sea animals and rotifers, such as in the aquariums or as in the Actinologia Britannica. And with the beauty of form and brilliance of color, and his popular works continued to appear for the rest of his life. But among all those books and pamphlets of Philip Henry Gosse, what caught my attention and my interest was the microscope and its revelations, light and transformations Gosse found through it. And the publications by Gosse and his biographies have introduced him as an autodidact naturalist, but also as an ardent microscopist. And Gosse was not only a member of the Entomological Society, Linnean Society, and the Royal Society, but also Microscopical Society of London. In account of Gosse's inquisitive microscopical research, however, evenings at the microscope often came under notice, as is described by R.B. Williams, his major legacy. But however, historians have largely ignored an earlier book, which is called The Life Forms in its lower, intermediate, and higher forms, and which include copies of former successive papers that had originally published in Excelsior, and supplied an essential link to the physical theological thinking of life forms. And these are just briefly mentioned or entirely left out. So this talk is of my newly started research on major though into the history of microscopy and the very early modern physio-theology in Britain. And I attempt to discuss this continuity of Gosse's temporal involvements and religious sentiments to microscopy, along with his contemporaries, Mary Ward, the revealed John George Wood, and of course, Agnes Kepler, and all those Victorian popularizers shared their tacit consensus, both in style and matter. And to introduce Philip Henry Gosse, actually, there's only 2 book-length biographies of Philip Henry Gosse have been published, and both by his son Edmund. And actually, the Naturalist of the Seashore, The Life of Philip Henry Gosse, is based chiefly on Gosse's unpublished autobiography and his unpublished personal archives. And according to Edmund, Gosse learned about microscopy from George Adams, and at that time, he was bought a copy of George Adams' Essays of the Microscope, and it was in the 5th of May in 1873, 32, and the Wesleyan minister Revd Richard Knight was selling some of his spare books by auction, and Gosse was there and bought one edition of Adams' Essays on the Microscope, a quarto which he still possesses for a long time. And also Gosse wrote in his preface to his entomological journal that the most important events of our lives sometimes are just so accidental circumstances that he could say that all his happiness after had been dependent on the laying out of 10 shillings at a book sale. And in 1839, Gosse made acquaintance with Adam White, which happens at that year to be the first 17 founders of the Microscopical Society of London at Edmund Quackett's house in Wellclose Square. And that is on the September 3rd. And in the spring of 1843, the Society of Promoting Christian Knowledge wanted an introduction to zoology. And this opportunity also served as a publisher of the latest evenings at the Microscope in 1859. And from all those years, actually, Philip Henry Gosse earned his real passion for microscopy not until in June 1849 that he bought his own microscope and has hitherto taken a superficial interest in the lower forms of life. And he was obsessed with the literature of the subject, particularly from Andrew Pritchard, the history of the Infusoria. And reading this book gave Gosse a very important passion for the lower forms. And at this time, on June 11th, Gosse made his first independent examination of a rotifer and began to correspond with the leaders of microscopic science at that time. And he was soon elected a member of the Microscopical Society of London in November, and later serving on its council. And a new note on Philip Henry Gosse by R.B. Williams in 2021 supplemented the original Freeman and Wertheimer's bibliography of what it is involved in Gosse's publication of abstracts in reports of the proceedings or transactions of the Microscopical Society of London. And after this time, Gosse's early year experience as a local preacher among the Wesleyan Methodists was unsatisfying. And he said by himself that at time he was showing how very poor and crude his theology was at that time. And this manuscript book of skeleton sermons preached by him, and this note after 40 years of his original manuscripts was a hint to guess the later turning of Philip Henry Gosse to natural theology. And in 1856, Gosse would have been considered publishers, and for his plant book, The Life in its Lower, Intermediate, and Higher Forms, which was an expanded and carefully revised version of his former survey of the animate creation. And for the Excelsior, the full name was Helps to Progress in Religion, Science, and Literature. And Gosse's contributions was mainly in the first, third, and the fifth volumes. And in these volumes, Freeman and Wertheimer has made a list here about what is included in Excelsior and later in Life in its Lower and Intermediate and Higher Forms. And I only take the lower forms as my focus today because the time is limited. And also, as it is put by Freeman and Wertheimer, suggesting that the book reflects his progressive interest in an acquaintance with the lower invertebrate forms. And according to Gosse, the greatness of the works of Lord must not be estimated by their actual dimensions. That is how he focused mainly to the lower forms, especially infusorious and polyphers, rotifers, something like that. And in this book, in these early writings, with the white illustrations distinct in a black background, Gosse described one of the most attractive infusoria, which is called the vorticula, as a little bell of glassy transparency, and described it as sprightly and elegant. And also, another brilliant casket of gems is Pandolina molum, and Gosse expressed it like, particularly when the light is transmitted, the gleams through their dark green bodies is beautiful. And also, he described the volvox revolving regularly on its axis like an artificial globe. And all those narratives made by Philip Henry Gosse, and also the illustration from A to G delineated the manner of its self-division or self-generation of the infusoria. At length, the bell suddenly shoots away, gliding with great swiftness through the water. And this early piece of literature indicates Gosse as a creative writer, and as observed by Edmund, literary form is never neglected in Gosse, even diaries not intended to be published. And extreme clearness of observation found its natural expression in perfect lucidity of language. And this is what Edmund said in his book. And also, this book, the life in its lower, intermediate, and higher forms, Gosse proposed in this series of papers to describe some curious and less known phases of animal life, commencing at the foot of the scale, which we catch the first glimmering of the vital spark, and tracing it step by step upwards through its various developments and changes, its forms and functions. And this work supplied an essential link to the physio-theological thinking of life forms, because it indicates that Gosse is following an Aristotelian scala naturae, a thinking of life forms, which considers all creations is all set by a line order, like the great chain. And the next I would like to say is that in the preface of the Evenings at the Microscope in 1859, and Gosse, a brilliant 19th century British naturalist, wrote that he constantly found himself compelled to observe de novo. Though he's far from thinking slightly of the labors of others, there was also much perplexity and difficulty in his adventure, in his microscopical adventure in Evenings at the Microscope. And at this time, Gosse also made acquaintance with William Benjamin Carpenter and included some of copies of his subjects in Evenings. And especially in the Evenings at the Microscope and subjects from Carpenter, Gosse found that here, the beautiful vorticuli here was identified as microstoma, not the common bell-shelled one, but Gosse used words like a dozen of so glassy vases or elegant antique urns to describe them. But Evenings at Microscope was still a religious and ecclesiastical work, and Gosse beheld gods manifested in microscopical structures. And next, I will say something about popular microscopy. And other than Gosse, by the mid-century, several British naturalists have spent their careers in writing popular science literature in order to supply a general demand that has arisen for elementary handbooks upon microscope and its practical appliance to the study of nature. And popular literature was soon printed and published. And here, I just pick three as examples. The first is Agnes Cattlow's Drops of Water, which full names is Their Marvelous and Beautiful Inhabitants Displayed by the Microscope. And this was published very early in 1851 and was published towards the beginning of the microscopic second wave. And in this book, to become popular, Agnes Catlow made some romantic poems and a tongue with affinity and adventurous. Like she said that pass with me through a wonderful brazen tunnel with crystal doors as the entrance. And also, it includes a illustration of the Vorticula convectillaria. And the next I would like to say is the Revd John George Wood and his common objects of the microscope. And this is the Routledge book series of the common objects. And the first two was about the seashore and the common objects of the country. And the book was sufficient for early guidance and was illustrated with upwards of 400 pictures by Tooth and Wax. And then I would say Mary Ward. This is an illustration made by Tooth and Wax. And next is Mary Ward. And Mary Ward wrote a lot of microscopical books, like the Microscopical Teachings and Sketches with the Microscope in 1864. And she conducted capable original research and achieved prominence. And Bernard Lightman listed her literature among the bestsellers in Victorian era. And if we look them in common, there is a tacit consensus, both in style and manner, is that they try to use some strategies to initiate general readers into minuteness by different ways. And I list the 4 ways here, like the common objects can be readily obtained and easily handled. And we would say that they enlivened by a scientist's precision and a storyteller's knack for detail, like to use snatching up a gem here and there, but gleaning some words like that. And especially, we can find some very similar expressions in Gosse and Wood's papers. And like Gosse said, it in order to relieve as much as possible the dryness of technical description, a colloquial and familiar style has been given to the work, and a series of imaginary conversazioni or microscopical soirées is used. And at that time, actually, such conversazioni are very popular. And it is from the Illustrated London News in 1855, in the April. It shows a conversazione in the apothecary house. And also in John George Wood's writings, he said, we must be content to accept the more difficult language of theory and render it as little abstruse as possible. And from all those things, we could find that all popular microscopy books use a double skill and has their dual goal here. And also, the pictorial illustrations are almost coextensive with the descriptions. And the fourth is unveiling sacredness and the beauty heretofore enveloped in the impenetrable obscurity of their own minuteness, provoked religious thought. And actually, the narrative form adopted by these popularizers was profoundly influenced by William Paley's natural theology. And also, I would like to say there is a primitive inclination to vitalism by the consideration of spontaneous movement of animated microorganisms, of the shifting aqueous shapes of these invisible creatures. Those Victorian naturalists extended the long-held view of the divine mechanics with vitalistic leanings. And this is extremely obvious in the Romance of Natural History, which is written by Gosse and published in 1861. At that time, though Gosse did not purpose to enter upon any inquiry into the precise nature of life, they found that the degree of vitality possessed by animals is to a great extent in proportion to the degree of its organization, and may conclude from this that there is an intimate connection between life and organization. And the phenomenon of spontaneous generation, which Gosse called it the mighty principle. And according to him, a simple cell of some lower forms and mechanics constitute the entire organism, and such like simple structures resides a vital principle on which its integrity depends. And whatever the extent of organization may be, its perfection is essential and necessary to the maintenance of life. And then I will come to my conclusion here, that first, optical lenses have profoundly shaped the discourse of natural history, aided by the inventions which it has brought into requisition to make many life phenomena under faces and forms cognizable to sight. Is the aim scope of Victorian microscopists volumes, and also the conceptions about vision itself were in the progress of being transformed, and the use of illustrations is the main schema in that time. And the second wave of the microscopy became a major public phenomenon in Britain in the mid-19th century. And it is a typical example of the autonomous active construction and production of knowledge and its popularization. And also, microscopists were actively looking for new observations, ready to recognize and investigate the minute that the unassisted eye takes no recognize of their presence, yet so curiously fashioned, so elaborately constructed, so vital and so subtle. And in the end, I'll briefly introduce some research projects and exhibitions. Here in Tsinghua University in China, we had an exhibition about the wondrous foreign scientific instruments what did diplomatic envoy sent abroad see in Qing Dynasty. And we also have a scientific instrumental heritage of George Adams' microscope. And also, I will be have a forthcoming talk about the plastic faculty and Robert Hooke, in contrast with Raphael Cootworth and the construction of microscopic knowledge in June. And also, my league, assistant professor Zhang here, and has an ongoing project on the history of European naturalists in Jing-Jin-Ji province. And I hope anyone who is interested could discuss with me later or in private or in public, both okay. And that is my talk today. Much much thanks for your attention.